Nick. Good morning, everyone. I'm telling you, if we should anyway, Nick, just walk around with Pastor Nick for a day. You just feel better at the end of the day, right? So if you need some encouragement, he's your guy. My name is Matt, one of the pastors here, and it's my privilege this morning to continue our series called Life Hacks. And we're looking at the book of Proverbs. We're walking through this book in the Old Testament, a book of wisdom and just advice on life. And we're looking in this book and examining some solutions, some clever solutions to life's tricky problems. And it's my privilege today and my responsibility to talk with us about a problem that we all face, but maybe don't often enjoy talking about. And it's the problem of temptation. Right? What do we do with temptation? And I want us to read. We're going to start in Proverbs chapter 4. We're just going to read two verses, and I just want to set the stage for these couple of verses, but we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. And these two verses come at the end of a section, a passage of about 10 or 15 verses, where the teacher in the book of Proverbs is giving some instruction. And he's sort of laying out the roads and the paths that you can take in life. And there are paths that take us different directions. Some that lead in one direction and some that lead in another. And he's kind of laying out the pros and the cons of each. And at the end of this section, he sort of offers this summary statement. And it comes in Proverbs chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. And this is what he says. The way of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, which shines ever brighter until the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like total darkness. They have no idea what they are stumbling over. I want to ask you to pray with me as we continue this morning. God, we love you, and I just want to take a moment this morning and say thank you for your word. I pray that as we open it today that you would speak to us. God, we know that it's alive and it's active and it has the ability to kind of cut into the places in our lives that maybe we're often unwilling to go, and I pray that today you would shed light on those places and help us, teach us. God, help us to grow as we look at you today. In your name we pray. Amen. I love the imagery in these couple of verses, right? You get the way of the righteous is like the dawn. And as you read the book of Proverbs and this passage, these couple of verses, they sort of paint this picture for us. But over and over again, you bump into this reality that the teacher in Proverbs sort of puts forward. And he says that essentially where we're going to start this morning is that there is a path that leads to life. Right, the fundamental assertion in the book of Proverbs is that there is a way to do life that works. Right, so the teacher, the writer in Proverbs, often it's King Solomon, looks across the landscape of life at just all the scenarios, all the life that's lived around him. Right, sometimes it's his own, sometimes he's looking maybe at families and neighbors nearby, but he's just observing all the life that's lived around him, and he reaches this conclusion that there's a path that leads to life. There's a way to do life that works. Right? There's a way to engage with your children that leads to life. There's a way to go about your career and your work and to kind of, approach these things in your life. There's a way to do that works, that leads to life. There's a way to approach marriage and relationships and intimacy. And he just observes all the places that we live life. But just all the places around you and me that life happens. And as he's observing all of these scenarios play out around him, he reaches this conclusion, and you bump into it over and over again. There's a path, there's a way, a road that you can take that leads to life. I was thinking about this imagery. So he uses the imagery of dawn, right? That it's a path that just gets brighter and brighter, that you can see how to live. And I was thinking about this and what this looks like for us. What he's saying is that we all, I think a bit of what he's saying is that we all sort of start off with this vision of where we're headed. Right? When I say there's a path that leads to life, it's this idea that maybe, there's a way and a course that we can take in life that leads to light, that leads to life. And Pastor David hit on it the first week in our series when he talked about the purpose of Proverbs. And he says that these instructions are meant to show you how to live life in a way that takes you to justice and fairness and equality and things that are good and right and true. And it's this idea that, man, there's this destination, this way to live that takes you to a place that leads, a path that leads to life. That's good for you and good for the people around you. And I was thinking about this imagery, this dawning imagery, and for me, it took me back to a place that Justin and I got to, we visited a number of times. So we lived just north of Boston for a few years, and there was this place between where we lived, and it was just classically New England, but this little space between where we lived and where Jess worked, about 5 miles, to Jess's work. And along the way, we would pass this place called Appleton Farms. And I have a picture of it here. It's beautiful, right? You're like, oh, it's hot outside in Kansas. Wouldn't this be lovely, right? But Appleton Farms was this, just beautiful kind of reservation between where we lived and where Jess worked. And so we passed it all the time. It was one of my favorite places to run. And oftentimes on the way home from work, I'd pick Jess up from work, and we just pull off at this little space, and it was this, I forget how many acres, but it was one of the oldest, continuously working farms in the country. It had been in a family for something like 9 or 10 generations, and they had carved single-track running trails, and there was pasture land, and there was farming, and there were this beautiful space where the trees had all grown up, but back in the day, they had cut carriage runs, so horse and carriage could ride through, and grass had grown in these lanes. I mean, it was just all these scenes of beauty and peacefulness and tranquility, and it was one of our favorite places, and it was free, which always helped, right? And we would go and we would walk, and oftentimes I remember I was just kind of reflecting, man, we were kind of facing down challenges in life, trying to decide the path that we would take in life. God, where are you leading us? And what does the path that leads to life look like for us, for our family? God, just walking through things as you do in life, and just thinking, man, laying this image over that experience for me, this was a place of peace. And when I read this passage in Proverbs, that the way of the righteous is like the dawn, that there's a path that leads to life. It's this kind of imagery. The writer of Proverbs looks at life and says, there's a way for you and me to live that leads to beauty, that leads to peace, that leads to tranquility, that there's a place that leads to life where all of these things that in our hearts we value and we know when they're absent and we sense when they're broken, that in our hearts, that this place that longs for that kind of existence and that kind of experience, the writer of Proverbs looks around, there's a path that leads to life. For me, again, this imagery in Appleton Farms was that space. Reminds me how there's a way and a destination and a place that we're headed that leads to life. And Proverbs again and again and again points us in that direction. But, right, Proverbs does something else. And one of the reasons Proverbs, this collection of sayings, if you've ever read it, it's a popular book to read. There's 31 chapters, and often you'll hear people suggest, read one each day. It just gives you really practical life advice. It's really honest. Right? And it's one of the reasons it's so appealing. It just steps into the grind of life and is really practical. So it's not surprising that in this book, while it admits that there's a destination, a way to live that works, it's also very honest that along this path, we run into, we're going to call them temptations this morning. Right? That along this path, there are invitations to choose a different path. We're keeping it real simple this morning, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right? There's a way to live, but along this path that we walk, Proverbs again and again admits, man, there's an invitation, there are temptations that sort of entice you to choose a different path. And you see it in our text. The way of the righteous leads to the dawn. Grows ever brighter, but the way of the wicked, there's another path that you can take, and that path leads to darkness. So much so that you don't even see what you're stumbling and tripping over. Proverbs is really honest, and I want us to kind of dig into this moment. So if there's a path that leads to life, Proverbs says, man, there are other paths, and these temptations, essentially, Proverbs is very honest, these temptations are a shortcut to the path of life. Right? That along the way, temptation invites us to take shortcuts.
We know, we have in our hearts this destination. Man, this is the kind of life I want to lead. I mean, this is the kind of person I want to be. This is where I want to end up. This is where I want to go. And we sense that. We intuitively know, man, I want goodness. I want rightness. There's something in us that recognizes often that we're broken and we're on this road. And Proverbs makes it really clear as we walk this road, man, temptation along the way invites us to take a shortcut. And I want us to kind of dig into this idea, just to think about temptation for a minute. Let me see if I can illustrate. My wife has this tendency. I'm not going to throw her under the bus on her temptations this morning. That's not what I'm about to do right now. But my wife has this tendency, Jess. We like to read, and we read all kinds of stuff. But she has this habit, right? She'll start a book, she'll do the first few pages, but inevitably, she jumps to the last page, right? I know what you're thinking. That's ridiculous, right? Why read the book, right? And I asked her last night, so I was thinking about this habit that she has, right? And so I'm like, can you think of a specific example? And she's like, no, I do it on all of them. I'm like, well, that's good, right? But we were talking, and a book she had read recently was The Martian. And if you don't know the story, he's like an astronaut who gets trapped on Mars, right? I mean, he's essentially one of the few characters. The story is only about his survival. And the clear question of the book is he going to survive, right? There's no other reason to read the book except to find out if he survives. You see where I'm going here, right? Not Jess, right? Not Jess. Jess jumps to the end just to make sure. Don't want too much suspense. Right, we don't want too much drama, so she jumps to the end just to kind of make sure everything's going to be okay. And once we're at peace about that, right, then she can go back and enjoy reading the book. And I thought, temptation a lot of times it's kind of like that. Like it's an invitation to shortcut the path that we know leads to life, just to kind of see if we can't just get to the end a little bit quicker. And Proverbs illustrates this in a number of ways. There are several themes that the book of Proverbs addresses. And I think, I say temptation, we all think of certain things immediately, right? Just temptation and certain things come to mind. And Proverbs is really helpful because it pushes us to dig into the notion of temptation just a little bit. One of the themes, we'll just pick a couple of examples. One of them comes in like the first chapter. And it's it's kind of the guise of a father talking to his son. And you can just see this father, he puts his hands on the shoulder of his son and he says, son, listen, when you walk out the door, there are going to be bandits, and they're going to entice you and say, come with us, come lay on the side of the road with us so we can ambush whoever walks by. They're going to say, come and shed blood with us. And it's this really graphic picture of temptation, an invitation for, the son to sort of, and that's, you're thinking, I've never really been enticed to do that, so I think I'm good, right? But then the writer of Proverbs, after painting this graphic picture, he says something that just sort of gets under the skin, right? And he summarizes this picture with this. He's like, this is the way it is with everyone who greedily seeks to gain, right? It uses the phrase unjust gain. So it is with everyone who seeks unjust gain, who just sort of does whatever they can to kind of get ahead, to make it to that picture of success, the person that just seeks to cut some corners maybe. Right? The person that just gives in to those few temptations that seem like small things, but man, it's just, we're aiming for the ideal. I want to succeed, I want to be successful, but along the way, temptation says, man, you can take a shortcut on this journey. And if you just fudge the numbers here, right, it's not a big deal. It'll move you a little bit more quickly, a little bit further down this road. And I just think, man, that picture, that image, man, unjust gain. So it is with everyone. It hurts the people around us. It hurts ourselves. The proverb concludes and says that they're left empty-handed. Right? When you just sort of sell out to greed, in the end, you're left with nothing. And I thought, man, where do I feel the pull in my life to shortcut the path that I know is right and good, and to try and just get ahead a little bit? And maybe it's different for all of us, right? Maybe for you, you cut some corners with family, right? And again, it's important to remember the vision, Appleton Farms, is a good one. I'm going to provide for my family. I'm going to build stability. I'm going to do all these things to work towards security. But along the way, temptation says you can shortcut that path and just cut some corners with your family. It's a temptation that's just kind of subtle, but Proverbs says, man, it pulls on us. We know there's a path that leads to life, but we're just kind of tugged in this direction and that direction. I was trying to think again, there are several themes in Proverbs, and we don't have time to dig into all of them. Another one that comes up over and over again is parenting. Right, Proverbs talks over and over again. I mean, a major sort of theme is like a father giving instruction to his son, and it lays out this path that leads to life. And in parenting, the path that leads to life is that eventually you build into your child the virtues that will keep them on that path, right? And you know that this is what you're called to do as a parent. And over again, Proverbs invites you to remember that calling, to remember that destination. And I'm just reflecting on that, man, along the way, where am I tempted to shortcut that path? Right, so maybe for me, this is just kind of a basic one, but this is a lot of times how it plays out in my home. I have twin daughters, as you know, and many of you know, and they're 3.5, and as 3.5-year-olds do, we fight. I know you probably don't believe that if you've met my daughters, but sometimes they're loud, right, and sometimes they fight. And I was thinking about just parenting and the work of temptation, the sort of subtle pull of temptation in my life. And this is how I think, this is one way that it creeps up. I come home, I'm tired. Maybe I really want to know who's winning the British Open, and so I want to check ESPN. I want to know, is Phil Mickelson going to beat Stinson? I don't know, but I really want to check it out, and I kind of like it, so I want to do this, and I'm tired, and I woke up really early to run with Pastor David at 5, and he stood me up, and I'm really sleepy, and this is just kind of, life is happening, and I'm walking down this road, and the girls run in, who knows what it is, and they're just tells me that typically there's like something in me that I don't hear it, but there's this like whine pitch, right? They hit this level, and they're just kind of fighting. They're like, she took this, and it could be anything. She's not playing the game the way that she's not doing what I want her to do. I'm like, join the club, right? And the temptation for me in that moment, right, is I'm kind of locked in what I'm doing. And what's happening with them is an interruption to what I want. And the subtle temptation for me in that moment is to kind of parent for convenience. And so maybe they're fighting over something. I'm like, all right, just give it to me, go. And it's like, well, I'll just take it away. And instead of, I'm admitting that I know you don't do this every time, right? I'm not trying to hold up some ideal that you always have to live to, but Proverbs strikes me that my vocation as a parent is to build virtue into my children. And here I have a moment to maybe teach and instruct, to at least just make a little bit more effort to kind of, okay, what's really happening here? Let's talk about what's happening here, and let's just look. But instead, because I'm tempted to just sort of want to be convenient, I shortcut the path that I know leads to life. And I miss an opportunity to teach and instruct and help them live in a way and point them in a direction that will lead to their future life. It's a subtle thing, but I wonder, man, what does it look like in your life and mine? Man, where are we tempted to take shortcuts? Proverbs gives us a number of them. And a classic one, is maybe you thought of it, I mean, Proverbs is full of it, but is sexuality. And, maybe not a popular subject to discuss on a Sunday morning, but over and over again, Proverbs really attacks the question of, like, as a father to a son, of promiscuity, right? And it's really interesting. So just the pattern that we're using, the writer of Proverbs says there's an ideal. There's a way to engage in this part of life that leads to the dawning of the sun, that grows ever brighter, right? That leads to a place of goodness and intimacy and richness. And he tells the son, along the way will be so many voices tempting you to shortcut that path. And again, right? What does that look like? That can take so many forms and expressions in this room this morning. You know, maybe the classic one we think of, you think of pornography and just giving into lust, it's a shortcut. The hard work of like physical intimacy and all the things that comes with that, and the Proverbs, and we probably know, builds goodness and virtue. Man, it's just an invitation. Well, you can get to that good destination much more quickly if you, right? Maybe it comes up differently. Maybe it's, man, you're at work and you know you can sense that the way you're engaging this coworker is just, you know, there's a little flirtation in there. You're just kind of emotionally connecting. And you know, man, this is probably not good. But, man, the hard work of intimacy with your spouse, you're years and years into your marriage, and it's not always easy, and this is just so much, it's just easier, right? And it's a temptation to shortcut the path and say, man, you can have this goodness just a little bit more quickly, a little bit more easily, and it's really no harm, no foul. There are loads of examples, and we won't hit them all this morning. And I know some of it's a bit heavy. Temptation is not a fun subject, right? But I don't know what it looks like for you. Justin and I, we were just kind of riffing on different temptations. Man, what are some just practically day-to-day things? And I would leave you, man, just where do you feel the pull to take a shortcut in your life? The things that you know are good and virtuous and right, man, and Proverbs probably says something about it. But Proverbs does something really interesting. It's not just a shortcut on this path, it's a shortcut that leads to a dead end, right? Proverbs makes it very clear temptation is a shortcut that leads to nowhere. No one walks down the aisle dreaming about the day they'll cheat on their spouse, right? Like we have this ideal, we know, man, this is the good things that I want, but along the way, temptation invites us, and we think it will help us get to where we want to go, but so subtly, Proverbs exposes it leads to nowhere. And this got me thinking again, while we lived in New England, I went on a backpacking trip with some friends, and we were up in the Green Mountains of Vermont, and had done 3 or 4 days and nights, and we were coming out, and we had driven, and we were making our way back to where we lived, and we were looking at a map or like a GPS thing, and we knew this kind of the road went one direction, but it looked like we could go this way, and so we kind of altered course and followed this map, and then as we were driving along, we ran into this sign here. I don't know if you can read that, right? Right? It's not what you want to see, right? Right? Your GPS is wrong. Yeah. And this is what Proverbs says to us. Temptation, right? It never hits us quite so bluntly. It's so subtle, right? It can just sort of, we can keep it under wraps, we can control it, it can fly under the radar. It never just kind of like, this will lead to a dead end, right? Your GPS is wrong. I mean, would that it were so simple, right? We would all be so righteous. But it's not. It sort of flies under the radar, and we think it's kind of helping us get forward. And in the end, Proverbs, again, is so helpful because it just exposes the truth. Temptation is a shortcut to nowhere. But, again, Proverbs is so helpful because as you walk this path and as we're navigating this reality of temptation, Proverbs does something really helpful, and it gives us some guidance to just kind of help us see truth, right? Essentially what Proverbs does is it invites us to turn on the lights, right? And this is sort of, if you're looking for a practical, how do we overcome temptation piece to this talk this morning, it's that over and over again in Proverbs, if you want to navigate the path of life without stumbling around in the dark, it makes sense. Proverbs says, turn on the lights. Quite literally, in many cases, turn on the lights, right? Temptation, it says, loves secrecy and darkness and privacy and all of these things. It says, expose this, right? Turn on the lights. Just do everything you can to bring it out into the open, and it's where we started, right? The way of the righteous is like the dawn. It sheds light. And so, maybe you're looking for some practical advice on how do I manage the temptations in my life. Proverbs gives us some, and we're going to look at a few. The first one might be this: to know yourself. And we're just going to walk through these quickly. Man, know yourself. Take a moment to examine your own heart and life. And this is in Proverbs chapter 4, actually in the passage that our text is taken from this morning. It says this, Proverbs 4:23, keep vigilant watch over your heart. That's where life starts. And it's this idea that if you will take a moment to examine your own life, man, know where you're weak. Know where you're susceptible. Know where the pulls in your life are and be aware of them. It's a way of turning on the lights, right? It's a way of stepping out of darkness and denial and just sort of, and just saying, all right, this is who I am. And Proverbs says, this passage in Proverbs 4 talks about your eyes and your feet and your hands and your heart and your mouth. And it's just like, know the spaces in your life where you're susceptible to take a shortcut. Right? So know yourself. Man, take some time to examine. How else can you turn on the lights? This proverb, check this one out. Proverbs chapter 2, verses 20. This says, so join the company of good men and women. Keep your feet on the tried and true paths. So maybe it's know yourself, but maybe another step that you could do, some advice Proverbs gives to you, man, is to find and follow good examples. Right? This says the company, find the company of good men and women. And this is how I would put it to you this morning. Find someone who's a little bit further down the path of life. Right? So you have this ideal, I have this sense of where God is leading me and directing me. Man, find someone who's just a little further down that path and follow them. Right? Use them. They're going to shed light on your experiences. And so this is a way for you to turn on the light. Know yourself, your heart. Find someone that's a good example. Proverbs gives us another one, and this might be just open yourself up to community, right? Open yourself up to others. We're just getting really practical advice here, right? Everything about temptation pulls us away from these things, right? Temptation always pulls you deeper and deeper in denial, always pulls you away from the people who are going to influence you for good, always pulls you away from openness and transparency. And so Proverbs says, turn the lights on, right? Open yourself up to others. And listen to this. We hear this one probably a lot if you've been around church. Proverbs chapter 27. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Right? Step into community with others. And then they'll begin to know you and you'll share with them and there will be openness and they'll be able to help in these areas of weakness in your life. Wounds from a friend will help you grow. Right? This is another one. Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Open yourself up to others. And the result, Proverbs says, is they'll just help shed light. They'll turn light on in the dark places of your life. Your tendency, my draw is going to be secrecy, is going to be pulling back. Proverbs hits this too, Proverbs 28:13. People who conceal their sins will not prosper, but if they confess, turn from them, they'll receive mercy. Open yourself up to others. And as you begin to walk and they begin to kind of sharpen you and you sharpen them and expose this sin, it's just turning on the lights. James says you confess your sins one to another. It's just turning on the lights. It robs the temptation of its influence and its power in your life and helps you walk towards the dawn. Really practical advice. Really practical advice. Those are some simple things that you and I can do. But let's be honest, right? Let's be honest for a moment. How many of you would say, man, right, that's great. And I do and have done and maybe will do those things, but inevitably I circle back, right? Inevitably good advice is great, but good advice only gets me so far, right? And this is where I think Proverbs really helps us. A few years ago, I was reading, I don't know how I came across the article, but it was, I think I shared this with the students, but some researcher in Germany, a German researcher was examining sort of some tendencies in the human capacity to walk and kind of how the tendency in us to walk in circles, right? So the researcher took their subjects and they dropped them in the middle of the Black Forest and kind of set, their objectives to them and begin to examine them and notice, right, that when the forest was so dense, they had no external point of reference. Right? They had no influence from outside that sort of helped them determine the direction they were walking, and inevitably all of them walked in circles. And this researcher said something that was just, it just blew my mind, right? That this researcher kind of admitted that there is something in us that can't walk straight. Right? That there's something in us, and when you take away an external focal point, something outside of ourselves, there's something in us, we can't walk straight. We're going to circle back. And I mean, how many of you would say, I know this to be true? I know this to be true, right? No matter how hard I try, whatever good advice I choose to follow, I circle back. And Proverbs, as we conclude this morning, Proverbs speaks to that moment. See, Proverbs is more than just a book about good advice. If that's all it were, it's more than that. Proverbs, kind of the fundamental, where Proverbs all starts is that it says all of this advice is good, but all of this advice is given in the context of a relationship with God. Right? This is God's instruction to a people that he has loved and called and chosen. In the Old Testament, it's a people he's redeemed. It's a people he's brought out of Egypt. It's a people that he has said, I love you. You are my own. I have a plan and a future and a purpose for you. And in the context of this relationship, then, he gives instruction. And so what Proverbs does first is it invites us into relationship, that the path of life begins with relationship with God. And in Proverbs, the language might be wisdom, capital W. Right? Listen to this voice, this relationship with wisdom. In Proverbs, the language that you bump into will say the fear of the Lord. It starts with the fear of the Lord, but all of this points us to Jesus. You bump into it in Proverbs and then again, and then you realize, man, this is pointing me to Jesus. The path of life for you and for me this morning starts with looking at Jesus. Do you hear me this morning? The clearest and best way that you and I can turn the lights on in our lives is to look at Jesus, who said, I'm the light of the world. Said, don't go, I read this morning, just in my own, John 11, don't continue walking around in the dark and you stumble over stuff that you can't see. I'm the light. Let my light live inside of you. I'm the light of the world. The first step to overcoming temptation, right, kind of where it all starts is to look at Jesus. And I just want to finish with a passage from Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4 says, Jesus understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. Can we go back to the beginning of that passage? I just want you to see what's happening here. Right, so Proverbs first says, know yourself. Know your weaknesses. Examine your heart. Listen to what it says about Jesus. He knows you. Listen, he knows every susceptible place in your life, every weakness, every time you've tripped, every potential trip you may take. Jesus knows you. He knows you better than you know yourself. And he says, look at me. Right? Proverbs said, find a good example and follow it. Right? Let's keep reading. Jesus understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings, right? Yet did not sin. You're looking for a good example on how to navigate temptation. Jesus says, look no further. You can look at me. Let me turn the lights on in your life. Proverbs says, man, open your life to others. Don't conceal, confess. And when you do, you'll find mercy. And what does Hebrews tell us? So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy. We will find grace. And I don't know where you feel the pull of temptation in your life today, but the invitation to you is look. The invitation to me is look at Jesus. The writer of Hebrews says one more thing that I think speaks to us today, and I think I put it in there. Is it chapter 4, chapter 12? My Kindle died, so I can't read it. But he says this, right, that the way, it uses the language, right? So let's put aside all the sins and the temptations that so easily entangle us. Let's put them aside. And then it says, verse 2, but the way to do this is to fix your eyes on Jesus. And then it says, fix your eyes on Jesus, the one who starts and perfects or finishes your faith. Right? And it's this really powerful statement that on the path to life, you don't have to do it by yourself. Alone, you and good advice, you're going to circle back every time. But when you look to Jesus, who has done the work on the cross, in the resurrection, and now in your life, he's conquered sin and temptation. He's sort of cut through all that mess, and he's turned all the lights on, so now you can see, and I can see. Preparing for this morning and thinking about today, I came across a quote from C.S. Lewis, and I'll just leave you with this, right? He says the reason, he's explaining why he became a Christian and what he thinks about Christianity. And, he's having a conversation with guys much smarter than me. And he says this about Christianity. He's like, I believe in Christianity it's like looking at the sun, right? Not just because I can see it, but because by its light, I see everything else. And the invitation from Proverbs, from the gospel to you and me this morning is look at Jesus, and by his light, see everything else. See every wrong path, right? See the false allure of every temptation in your life. But because by looking at him, you not only see him, but by his light, you see everything else. It sounds a lot like Proverbs. The way of the righteous is like walking into the dawn. So my invitation to you this morning, to me, for all of us, you want to avoid temptation. We've given you some practical advice, but all of it starts, whether it's for the first time or whether you are decades into a relationship with Jesus, this call never changes, right? There's no other way to sort of navigate temptation. You don't sort of reach a stage where you don't have to do this anymore. Jesus says, look at me. Doesn't matter where we are, we're all in the same place as far as this is concerned. So my invitation to you this morning is to fix your eyes on Jesus and let him turn the lights on in your life today.